I'm here today with our May wrap-up. So May was the month of Believeth On, so we knew we were going to be reading quite a lot this month, but we actually ended up reading the equivalent of a book a day. We finished 31 books in May, and we've just finished Eragon this morning on the 1st of June, so I'm counting that in here as well. So yeah, this is going to be 32 books for you, so get settled in because it's going to take us a while. Going to try and go through them as quickly as I can. Got full reviews up on the blog for all of the Believeth On ones already, so I will link that down in the description if you'd like to see our fuller thoughts on any of the steps on the journey that we took. But yeah, the first book I want to talk about is actually one that I DNF'd, and that is Dead Beautiful by Yvonne Wong. I got 200-ish pages into this one and just couldn't do it anymore because this is just basically a really bad Twilight ripoff. Apparently it's zombies, which I didn't encounter. I flicked ahead to the end and it didn't seem as though it was getting any better, so I thought I'd put it down, but I wanted to mention it because I spent like a good 6 days trying to read this one. I was like, oh, I'll just keep like ploughing through it and hope that it gets better, and 200 pages was more than I should have given it. Like, you've got the guy comes and is like, she's new to the school, and then the mysterious hot guy is like really into her, and he's only ever spoken to her and nobody else, and they're lab partners, and yeah, it's just Edward Cullen but less interesting. And at least Twilight knows that it's cheesy. This was trying to be really serious. I read the first chapter of it as like a test, and it was a really, really great first chapter, but things go really downhill from there, so this was like the worst book I could have picked to just sample a first chapter of. So that was the only book that I failed to finish this month, but everything else we've managed to finish. The first book that I finished in May was Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Wong, which I'm probably saying terribly. I'm going off of how I've heard other people pronounce it. Love Boat Taipei follows a girl called Eva, and she goes to a school in Taiwan that her parents send her to because they believe that she lives in America, but they think that her American culture is kind of overtaking her Chinese culture, and they want her to kind of embrace who she is more fully by going and experiencing the country where her parents grew up. It turns out the course that they've sent her on is like really notorious for being like where like the good kids go wild, and I thought this one sounded like it was going to be a lot of fun, but I had quite a few problems with it. Like, there's a lot of kind of emotional cheating that's like completely disregarded because the girl who is cheated on has mental health issues, so it kind of feels like it's accepting the fact that like, oh yeah, no, if you're depressed, if you've got anxiety, then you kind of deserve to be cheated on, which isn't great. There's other things as well that I don't really appreciate, but it kind of gets a bit spoilery. There will be a full review up on the blog, so I will link that down below when that is uploaded. I ended up giving Love Boat Taipei 2 stars, which breaks my heart because it's like the biggest debut of the year, and I thought I was going to love this one. So the fact that I actually hated it was a shock. After Love Boat Taipei, we moved on to finishing the Noughts and Crosses series. So we read Knife Edge, Checkmate, Double Cross and Crossfire, which are the full stories, and we also read Naught Forever as well. So the 4 novels from the series got 4 stars each, and the short story Naught Forever actually got 3 stars because it felt a bit unfinished. It leaves on a cliffhanger, and for a short story is ridiculously short. Like, you think you're only about halfway through and then it just ends, which is a shame. I'm wondering whether Malorie Blackman is going to explore it further in the future books because it's a character who comes back into the series. If you don't know anything about Noughts and Crosses, this is the idea of a world where the white people are like the lower kind of classes, and they've never been in power, and they were the ones that were slaves, and the black people are the ones who are in like the positions of privilege and power, and they are the ones who are like in control. It's just astounding. Like, I loved the first book when I read it when I was younger. I've read the first 4 books before, and I loved them all, and I still love them all, which is why I've given them all 4 stars. Wasn't a huge fan of the 5th installment. It introduces 2 new characters called Libby and Troy, and they are both really, really interesting, and I'm really interested in their story, but again, it's a book that ends on such a cliffhanger that it feels half finished. And this is one that when I've read the 6th installment in the series, whenever it is published, whenever it is announced, it will impact the way that I rate this installment. So I've given it 4 for now. It might go up to a 5, it might go down to a 2 or a 3, because it's just a case that it feels like a segment of a story. It feels like part 1 and then part 2 is just, they've forgotten to publish it in the same book. And I can tell why they would split it, because otherwise it would be really, really chunky and long. But I think it would have been better if they had waited until she'd finished the 6th one and made them into like one big book, so it was more of a cohesive story. We read these because they were up for the YA Book Prize, Crossfire was, and so it was kind of carrying on from our April TBR, because we started the Noughts and Crosses reread then, and I'm glad that we reread them because I did still really enjoy them, but they didn't blow me away quite as much as I was expecting. I don't know if it's because I'm a bit more of a critical reader now compared to when I was younger. When I was younger, I was just absolutely astounded by everything, and I can see the issues with them now. Like, I found a lot of them, they all have kind of split narratives, and most of them have like chronological, non-chronological storylines. So they jump around all over the place, and it's out of order, and it makes you really interested as a reader, but sometimes it means that things kind of get lost in translation a little bit. I noticed it with the dual perspective as well. Like, I would always kind of swing towards wanting to read one more than the other, and like half of the story wasn't as compelling. So they were all kind of like either solid 4 stars or like 3.5 that we rounded up. But glad that we had a chance to reread them, and would definitely still recommend them, but just a bit apprehensive about when the next installment comes out. After we finished Crossfire, it was time to move on to Believeth On, so I'll run through those really, really quickly for you. So the first book that we read for Believeth On was A Pinch of Magic by Michelle Harrison. This one got 5 stars. It's the story of 3 sisters who have a curse on their family, and they have to try to break the curse or they will die. Can't really say better than that. We both really, really enjoyed it, and we're looking forward to carrying on with the sequel, A Sprinkle of Sorcery, this month. The second book that we read for Believeth On was the first book in the Alex Rider series, which was Stormbreaker. This one was a 3.5 stars that we rounded up to a 4 stars. If you don't know anything about Alex Rider, his uncle gets killed, and after he investigates it, he actually gets hired by MI6, and they decide to send him on to the mission that killed his uncle in the hope that he can close the case for them and like kind of avenge his uncle. It's very cheesy. There's lots of like training montages, and like all of the bad guys are foreigners, which is like, it's quite cliched. But it's a lot of fun. I can see why they're so popular. It's not exactly to my taste, so it is like a 3.5 that we've rounded up again, but definitely looking forward to carrying on with the rest of the series, because I've got a feeling that like it's going to get wackier and wilder from here on out, especially because there's like 13 of them now, I think, which is crazy. The next book that we read for Believeth On was Dreaming the Bear by Mimi Thabo. This one gets 4 stars. This is about a girl whose family moved to Yellowstone, and she gets really, really sick. The rest of her family are all thriving, but she is really struggling. And one day she goes for a walk because her doctor has prescribed her fresh air and exercise to like help her feel better. And she passes out, and then she like crawls into a cave and ends up snuggling with a bear. Dangerous, I know, but she actually kind of like tries to nurse the bear back to health, because the bear has a shotgun wound which is infected, and she hasn't been able to feed, and like her hibernation has been disturbed. It's really heartbreaking. Like at the beginning you get like a little perspective from the bear when she's like ruminating on the fact that like her children have been taken by the hunters, and that really broke my heart. But the way that the story is told is really interesting, because the main character kind of disassociates. So you get some that's like from her perspective, and some that like it steps outside of her and you're watching her from a distance. Takes a little while to get your head around it. So considering the fact that it is very thin, like it did take a little while to get into it. But when we kind of got into the flow of the story, we read this one really quickly. Didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did, but I think that the way that the location is crafted is really good. And just the idea of a girl caring so much about a wild animal that she's willing to like risk her own life to be able to defend it is just a really, really sweet and inspiring story. The next book that we read for Believeth On was Wonder by RJ Palacio. This was a 5 star. Literally nothing I can say about this book apart from the fact that I cried twice, and I never cry at books, so that proves how good this one is. If you want to have a good old sob, get some tissues ready, get this book. It's about a boy who has a facial abnormality, and he goes to school, and it's his first, this is the story of his first year in mainstream education, and it is written so beautifully. I can see why everybody's been recommending it and raving about it for so many years, and I'm glad that I finally picked it up. So the next book that we read for Believeth On was Zombie by Darren Shan. This one ended up getting a 3 stars. Says it all in the title, really. There's meant to be zombies, and there's hardly any zombies. I think the zombies come into it about here. So you don't get much zombie action, considering this book is like 220 pages, and they don't come in until after page 150, which is a little bit frustrating. Not really much else to say. It ends on a cliffhanger that could mean that the series is going to go in a completely different way to expected. So we are going to carry on with the second one just to see how it goes. But it did not impress me anywhere near as much as I wanted it to. And it's a case that if we didn't already own the next few books in the series, we would not be carrying on, which is a massive shame. The next book that we read for Believeth On was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. I actually ended up dropping this one down a star. This is the 4th time I've read it, giving it 5 stars every time. This time I've given it 4 stars. I just think that the more you reread these, the less impressive they are, which is going to be a really controversial opinion because so many people love these, no matter how many times they reread it in all the different formats and all the films and stuff. But I just think the ending is really lazy. And I've finally put my finger on the fact that that's the issue I have with it, because I've always kind of felt a bit deflated when I finished this book. I've been like, oh, it's a 5 star because everybody loves it, but I've never been like overwhelmed, and I've always kind of forgotten about it, and that's why. So then we read The Ship of Shadows by Maria Kuzniar, which we ended up giving 4 stars to. So The Ship of Shadows is a pirate ship which is full of shadows from like previous crew members. They like leave a little bit of their essence behind to help out the crew in the future, which is a really, really cool concept. I thought it was just going to be like a haunted ship, but it's not. It's like so much more complex than that. And our main character is somebody who has always wanted to go on adventures, but then she kind of accidentally gets taken along with the crew, and she has to help them solve a mystery because they're trying to find fragments of a map. There's nothing confirming that this is going to be part of a series yet. I can't find anything anywhere saying that there's going to be any more installments, but then this one doesn't come out until the beginning of July, so I'm hoping that we might get some more news just after publication, because this is a crew who I would love to follow on so many different adventures. Like, this has got great found family elements, and I think the locations are really well described, and the whole idea is just so creative that I would love to follow this further and like see how the story kind of pans out and when they find more sections of the map. The next book that we read for Believeth On was Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. This is the first book in the Nevermore series. This was 5 stars for us. A lot of people have said that it's similar to Harry Potter, so I was a bit apprehensive when we were reading both of them in the same month, because I thought maybe it'll be a bit too similar and then I won't enjoy it as much, but I actually think this is way better than Harry Potter, which again, controversial. But I just think that the way that the world is crafted is far more interesting. Morrigan Crow, who is our main character, is a cursed child, and that means that bad things kind of happen whenever she's around, and she's destined to die on her 12th birthday, but then it kind of gets like pulled forward a bit, and so then she thinks she's going to die early, and this like mystical man called Jupiter North comes and he rescues her, and he takes her to this land called Nevermore, where he asks her to partake in these trials. He'll kind of like sponsor her as she goes forth. So not only do you have kind of like Morrigan coming to terms with being in a new place, again, really good found family elements, but you've also got her going through these trials and trying to come to terms with like, why does Jupiter want me? Why didn't I die? Like, what was my kind of curse when I was younger? There's just so many different aspects that are so fascinating about this book, and I think we read nearly the whole thing in one day. I think we literally had like 20 or 30 pages that we had to read the next day because we couldn't physically stay awake. So looking forward to the second installment. The third installment's out in August, so I'm really looking forward to like following Morrigan onwards. If you're looking for a new middle grade series, if you've read Harry Potter and you've loved it and you want something new to try, definitely pick these up. The next book that we read for Believeth On was The Infinite Lives of Maisie Day by Christopher Edge. Didn't know anything about this one going into it, so ended up being a little bit kind of overwhelmed and underwhelmed all at once, which is impressive. So this got 3 stars from us. So a girl called Maisie wakes up on her birthday and everything outside is just black. So her house is still there. She can see through the windows that the outside is still there, but when she opens the front door, it's just blackness. And then the blackness starts kind of eating her home. And then the next chapter, the girl called Maisie wakes up and it's her birthday. She goes downstairs and she has a great time with her family. And it jumps between the 2 Maisies, as the one of them is kind of trying to puzzle out why her home is being devoured by blackness and why her kitchen is suddenly really long and like other kind of physics related conundrums. And then you've also got the Maisie who is just experiencing her life as normal. The juxtaposition between the two is really interesting because you do find that it propels you through the like normal everyday sections because you want to work out what's going on. But like, I'm not the smartest when it comes to science stuff. Like, I can talk about books all day long, but science is something that has always overwhelmed me and I've never really managed to get my head around it. So this book did go over my head a little bit. Considering how short it is, I kept kind of putting it down and putting it off. And we did read it in a day, but we should have been able to read it in about an hour and a half. And it took us like 6 or 7 hours. The ending's a bit of a cop-out. I'm not going to say what happens because I don't want this to be like really spoilery because it is really short. And if you're interested in what happens at the end, you can make up your own mind. But it definitely took away from the impact of the story for me. I thought that it was going to be quite a powerful one. I thought that it had been really kind of well done. It was like quite sad, but it was very intriguing, and then it all just fell apart a bit for me. Yeah, not a huge fan of this one, which is such a shame because like it's absolutely gorgeous. The next book that we read for Believeth On was Wonderscape by Jennifer Bell. This was another one that I was kindly accepted to read through NetGalley. Comes out in the first week of June, so depending on when we upload this, it'll either be like in a couple days or it's just come out. So we gave this one 5 stars. This follows 3 students who they go into a house to try and rescue a dog which they can hear barking, and then they find themselves transported to a ship which is captained by Sir Isaac Newton. So they're in a game called Wonderscape, and in this game you can kind of go through different realms. There's thousands of realms and you can go through them all and you complete like a challenge, and then you get to meet a figure from history. And the 3 kids get told by Isaac Newton that if they don't get home within 48 hours, then there's a good chance the universe is going to just erase their existence because they've actually managed to find themselves transported to like the 25th century, which isn't the easiest thing to get back from when you're from like regular everyday. But it's so fun. Like, I absolutely loved this one, and it was a case that all the different kind of places you go, you learn so much about the different famous figures, but you also get to see like the 3 characters, they go to school together but they don't know each other that well, they're not really friends, and then as you see their kind of friendship develop, I think it's really realistic. Like, sometimes friendships, like you find yourself in a situation and you're like drawn together straight away, but they do bicker a little bit and they do have some problems at the beginning that they need to kind of learn how to overcome so they can work better as a team. And I think the way that Jennifer Bell writes it is just brilliant. I haven't read any of Jennifer Bell's other books, but I have seen people recommending, she has a trilogy out and I have seen people recommending those, so I'm definitely planning on getting those at some point because just her writing is so much fun. And it's a case that you kind of have like a story which transforms into another story. So as well as the kids trying to get home, there is another plot line going on as well, which propels things a lot faster. Yeah, definitely recommending Wonderscape, so 5 stars for that one. And the last book that we read for Believeth On was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This was another one that actually ended up going down in my estimations. I took it down from 5 stars to 3 stars. J.K. Rowling has been very transphobic on social media recently, and it makes you look at this book in a very different way, and that's all I'm really going to say about it. I'm so sad because I was really looking forward to rereading them, and then the more she says, the more I'm like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to. One day, we will finish Harry Potter series. One day. So then, after Believeth On was over, it was back to just reading random books all over the place. Sean and I had a few more books that we did share with you that we were going to try to get to, so I will talk about those ones first, and then I'll tell you what I did, because I'd forgotten to challenge myself to read anything specific, and I ended up going completely off the map and just reading absolutely anything I felt like picking up, which is fun. So the next book that Sean and I decided to read in May was The Gunslinger by Stephen King. This is the first book in the Dark Tower series. Sean has read this before and he kind of recommended it to me. He said that it's kind of like light fantasy. It's almost YA, and I can totally see what he means because there are aspects of it that do feel very YA. I'm not quite sure how to put my finger on what it is, and I've been thinking about it over the last few days and I just can't really get there. But I think it's like, it's very concise. Like, a lot of fantasy kind of rambles away and it expands the world a lot and you get like a lot of fluff, but this is very to the point. Like, Stephen King knows exactly what he wants Roland to do, and Roland just does it. I think we ended up giving it 4 stars, but it's a case of it, like, rounding up from 3.5 again, because, like, there's a lot of very sexist language in this, and the way that the women are kind of treated, I really didn't sit well with me. So even though I enjoyed the story and I'm very interested to see how it goes, like, all of the women were just sex objects, and I feel like this isn't like old fantasy. This is like, I mean, it's the 80s, but it just feels like it feels really, really outdated when you read it. And I didn't think that most fantasy from the 80s was like quite this bad. Like the other older stuff I read seems to be a bit less kind of overtly sexist. And I don't know whether that's just how Stephen King feels about women, or whether it's just this book in particular. We'll wait and see how the rest of the series goes on. But it's like all of the female characters get killed after just being sex objects. That's not grand. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm like, maybe I should have rounded it down to 3 stars. Or did I? Have I forgotten myself? No, I definitely gave it 4 stars. I'm a bit surprised by that now. I think it's because like we read this in one sitting. Like we literally just read it cover to cover, and like it's not long, but it really absorbs you into the story. And like there's a little boy called Jake that Roland meets, and they like become friends, and it's really heartwarming. And then bad things happen, and I won't tell you exactly what those bad things are, but like it's a Stephen King book. I'm pretty sure you can guess. I can see why people don't love this one, and I can see why people do love this one. I'm looking forward to carrying on with the series, but I'm a bit apprehensive because the end ones are like absolutely massive, and not really sure how much more you can really do from here, but I'll find out. The next book that we read was thankfully 5 stars, and that was First Day of My Life by Lisa Williamson. Now, Lisa Williamson is one of my favourite authors. Read Paper Avalanche, loved it. Read The Art of Being Normal. Yes, I always get it confused with Am I Normal Yet, and I don't know why, because I've read and loved both of them, don't get me wrong, but I don't know why I always get it confused. But this book follows 3 characters. There's Ram, there's Jojo, and there is Frankie. Frankie believes that Jojo might have kidnapped a baby, because a baby goes missing and Jojo doesn't turn up to pick up her exam results, and then Frankie phones her and she hears baby screaming in the background, and she's like, oh shit, Jojo, what have you done? So Frankie and Ram, who is her ex-boyfriend, they drive across country to Swindon. What are the chances Jojo runs away to my hometown, and then they try to track her down and discover why she's taken a baby. It's a wild story. Like I could totally see what was coming, but it played out in such a way that it was so satisfying that I didn't even care that I saw it coming. I was still absolutely blown away. We did take a bit longer to read this than we probably should have, because we kept stopping and being like, right, okay, if this is meant to be Swindon, like, so she's just walked out of the hotel and she's turned left and then she's turned right, and we were like figuring out where Frankie had gone, which was a lot of fun. Like I don't know if Lisa Williamson even came to Swindon and actually planned out, whether she was like, oh, what's a town that has no personality and is very easily forgettable? Swindon. But like so much fun. The only thing that would have made it better for me was the fact that like Ram drove down. Would love to see him like struggling with the magic roundabout, because people who haven't been to Swindon are like, what is this thing? And all of us are like, yeah, we've grown up with this. It's just many roundabouts in like one big conglomeration of roundness. Yeah, so excited about this one. I'm going to be writing a full review because it comes out in July, so I've read it a bit early, but it comes out in July. I'm going to be writing a full review because there is a lot to say about this one, but I love the way that female friendship is shown as like so important, and Sean believes that it's kind of like also like toxic, which is interesting because we had like quite a lot to debate in this one, because I thought the representation of female friendship was really authentic. He was like, that just means that female friendships are really toxic and kind of dangerous, and looking back I'm like, actually that's quite true in some ways. So there's going to be a lot to kind of unpack on this one, so I'm looking forward to knuckling down and like getting all of my thoughts out, but loved it, and if this isn't up for the Way Book Prize next year, I will be mightily surprised. The next book that we decided to read was The Outcast by Taran Matharu. This is the prologue prequel novel to the Summoner series. So we read the first third of this in February because it was originally published as a short story called Origins, and then was expanded into a full-length novel. Didn't love it as much as I was hoping to, which is a shame. We gave it 4 stars. Got a feeling that it probably should have been a 3, but I love the characters and I love the world and I love Taran Matharu's writing, so I couldn't help myself rounding it up. We've got so many 4s this month that probably should have been 3s because we've been a bit kind of lenient, but then we've also got some 2.5s that should probably be 3s that have gone down to 2s, but we'll talk about those later. It's conflicting because like there are things that you would think would be in here after having read the main trilogy that aren't, and there are things that are in here that they work really well once you've read the original trilogy. I think this would work better if you read it first. Taran Matharu on Goodreads has recommended reading this after the original trilogy, but I think it would actually work really well reading this first, because there are characters who pop up later on who become really relevant, and you don't know who they are, so you don't really care that much. But reading it this way around, you find yourself like really caring about them in this story. But if you read this story first, you would find yourself really caring about them in the main trilogy. So it could work either way. Arcturus is great. Sesharissa is great. I love the cast, but I already did. I just found myself kind of losing interest a little bit, which I wasn't really expecting. I still enjoyed it, but I had to kind of put it down and move on with other things for a little bit, which was not what I was anticipating with this one. I thought it was going to be like, oh, we'll finish that off in one sitting, but it kind of dragged, which is a shame. But I still really recommend the series, and I'm still really glad that we've like finally finished it, because it was been a lot of fun. The next book that we decided to read together was actually one of the TBR jar books. So then we moved on and read How to Stop Time by Matt Haig. 4 stars. I don't really think I'm like clever enough to understand it properly, so I don't really think I can comment on it, which is really stupid. But basically there's a guy, and he ages really slowly. He ages up until the age of 11, fine, and then like after that, like every year, like he doesn't change at all. It takes like 15 years for him to look like he's aged 1 year. Fascinating concept, works really interestingly. Lots of like journeys through time, quite similar to Wonderscape. You learn a lot about the past, you learn a lot about like the historical contexts of like London and the different kind of time periods and the different kind of people who would have been around in those times. But I don't know, it's hard to judge it, because I thought it was a 5-star and then the ending happened, but then I don't know if there would have been any ending that would have satisfied me. This book is so hard to like end in a satisfying way, because we know the main character is going to live like hundreds and hundreds of more years, because that's the whole concept. He's got a really, really long life. So if you can't end it with his death, it's never going to feel complete. It's also marketed quite badly. It's marketed as a love story across the ages. So I thought it was going to be more like, oh, like he has like a love who is also, that he's called an Alba. They're called Albas because they used to believe that albatrosses lived for like hundreds of years. So I thought it was going to be like him and like his love would also be an Alba, and they would be like pulled apart and like come back together through the years. But it's not at all, and it's more of like familial love rather than romantic love, and I think the way that it's marketed is quite misleading. So it wasn't quite what I was expecting, but then I think I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to because of that. So yeah, this is a 4-star because it's just hard to word over it. And we also, as I said earlier, we finished Eragon this morning, which was also a TBR pick. That was by Christopher Paolini. This one got 5 stars. Basically, all the criticism I see from it is saying that it's like a rip-off of Lord of the Rings, and it's just Lord of the Rings written again. But I enjoyed it so much more than Lord of the Rings. So I've only read The Fellowship of the Ring so far, but I found it very boring, and I kept getting distracted and was just putting it down, and it took so long, and it felt like we've been reading it for like 3 years, even though it only took us like 4 days. But with Eragon, like, it's a lot longer. It's like 200 to 300 pages longer than Lord of the Rings, depending on what edition of Lord of the Rings you have. But it goes so much faster. Like, you meet a farmhand called Eragon, and he finds this mysterious blue stone, and then the mysterious blue stone hatches into a dragon. That's awesome. I always thought that the dragon was called Eragon, not the boy. So that was nice and confusing when he's like, Eragon is walking through the field. I'm like, oh, no, not dragon, farmhand. Less exciting start than I thought. But yeah, so then the dragon is called Saphira. She is very, very cool. They can like communicate telepathically, which is really fun. Didn't expect that option, like that inclusion. Yeah, like looking forward to where the rest of the series is going, because this is a story that I didn't really know much about it. It's kind of like your standard, like, there's a big bad, we're gonna face off against the big bad, but on the way to facing off against the big bad, we have to face off against his like bad minions. So this is just like one part of the like greater story, because there's like King Galbatorix, who is the big bad. We haven't actually met yet, which is fun. I've got some theories of where it's going. I've got some very interesting theories, and I'm looking forward to finding out. But it's a very strong first installment. Lots of action, lots of adventure, lots of kind of exploration, learning the world, learning the characters, getting a nice little cast going on. So I'm surprised that, like, it seems to be like Marmite. You either have all the 5-star reviews or all the 1-star reviews, and all the 1 stars are just saying that it rips off something else, but like, it doesn't. It pays homage to it beautifully, and you can tell that he's got inspiration from maybe 2 different places, but I wouldn't say that it was plagiarism at all, and I don't really get why people get that feel. But yeah, looking forward to carrying on with them, and I'm glad that I picked it out of the jar, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have picked it up for years, because it is chonky. While we are talking about the TBR jar books, I will talk about the rest of my TBR jar reads with you, because Sean was only interested in 2 of them, so I read 3 by myself. So the first of those ones that I read was Like Other Girls by Claire Hennessy. I was very apprehensive about this one when I pulled it out of the jar, because I've read Nothing Tastes As Good by Claire Hennessy, and it was a great book. I think I gave it 5 stars, absolutely loved it, but I'd heard a lot of bad things about Like Other Girls, and I actually ended up... I loved half of it, and I hated half of it, so it's a 2.5, because based off of, like, there are a lot of transphobic elements. There are a lot of kind of derogatory statements towards bisexual people, despite the fact that the main character is bisexual. I've got, like, quotes and stuff over on the blog, so as I've said, that will be linked down in the description. But it made me very uncomfortable. I hated reading it. I wanted to put it down, and then the other half of the storyline came through. So this is set in Ireland. So we follow a girl who is, her best friend has told her that she is transitioning. She goes from Seth to Evan, and he is quite obviously struggling to come to terms with his transition, especially because they go to an all-girls school, so he experiences a lot of discrimination from, like, the staff members and from the other students, just based off of the fact that he is trans. So the fact that his best friend also shits all over him effectively is awful to read, and some people say it could be realistic. I think that if you're genuinely best friends with somebody, then if they come to you with something like that, you're not going to make them feel awful about it, and you will be more tolerant because of the fact that they're your best friend. And that might just be me. I might be a more tolerant person than some people, but I don't believe that it is authentic that our main character has this reaction. But then she also finds out that she's pregnant, and now, being in Ireland, this was a few years ago, so this was when abortion was still illegal, so she travels to England to have her abortion secretly. She doesn't tell her family. She, like, scams her brother into, like, giving her money to come over, and she just comes for the day, she has the abortion, goes back, doesn't tell anybody, until she decides to go forward to a journalist, because she went to talk to, like, a family planning clinic, and it was actually, like, an anti-choice clinic, like, masquerading as, like, giving impartial advice. So she comes out with her story to, like, help other people. That aspect of the story, 5 stars, handled amazingly. Just, it's so emotional, but in, like, a kind of dry way, almost. Like, the main character, I think her name is Lauren. It's been a while since I've read it. It's been a while. It's been like 3 weeks, but I already can't remember. She doesn't feel guilt about her abortion. She feels, like, more emotion about, like, the way that she feels she should be feeling. So, like, should I be feeling sad? Would other people be feeling sad? Am I not normal? Am I a monster because I don't feel sad, because I don't feel guilty? And I think that is very, very realistic, because so many people, like, it's not a situation I've ever been in, it's not a situation I will ever be in, I hope, but so many people don't feel remorse for an abortion because it's just another choice for them. And I think the fact that Claire Hennessy has this character who's like, I feel fine about that, why is everybody, like, making a big deal that I shouldn't be okay, that is just, it's handled so well. I loved it. And the fact that you've got the juxtaposition of, like, how well she handles that and how terribly she handles Evan's transition, it rages me, because this could have been a 5 stars so easily, or it could have been a 1 star so easily, and instead it's a 2.5 star, which I'm rounding down to a 2 because I can't condone rounding up to a 3 because the transphobic elements are so irritating. But more people should be able to read this book. Like, I should be able to recommend this book, because, like, it's got such an honest depiction of this girl travelling for this abortion, the way that she feels. But I'm never going to recommend this book because of the other aspects. It just annoys me. Because, like, don't be so complex and frustrating. Just be straight up, like, 5 or a 1, then it's nice and easy for me. The other book that I read from the TBR jar that was a bit conflicting was Internment by Samira Ahmed. Now, I was so excited when I pulled this out of the jar. I was like, this is going to be amazing. And it wasn't. It was not. So this is kind of like a what if, when Trump came into power, he made internment camps for Muslims. So we follow a character whose family is taken in the dead of night to this internment camp, and she is kind of raging against it, and she wants to be freed, and there are people protesting all across America, and her boyfriend kind of helps her like sneak statements out so that she can tell the like inner story of this camp. But like, it sounds awful, but I have seen kind of own voices, reviewers say exactly the same thing. The camp doesn't seem that bad. Like, she constantly references like the Nazis and the internment camps there and the Japanese internment camps, and if you look at those places, they are horrendous. And the fact that this character is living in a caravan, like a mobile home with her family, they each have a bedroom, they have a bathroom, they have a dining room, it's not great, because caging people up is always going to be awful. That's not freedom, and it's not acceptable, and it's horrendous. But when you look at some of the things that people have dealt with in internment camps in history, like throughout history, when you look at things like Auschwitz and the fact that so many people died and so many people went there thinking that it wasn't going to be that bad. And then you look at like this girl who's like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. I have my own bedroom and I keep headbutting my bunk bed. Like, mate, there are people with real problems. You have seen other members of this camp get taken, and you think they're being taken off to be tortured, and you're bitching about the fact that you're headbutting your bunk bed because your room is small? Like, come on. And like, I know she's young, so she shouldn't be expected to be like that mature, and she shouldn't be expected to like be a grown-up about the situation, but I just think that the way that it's handled, if this was written as an adult book, it would be powerful, it would be impressive, it would really make you think. And the way that it is, it makes you think, but it also makes you feel a bit frustrated, because it could be so much better. Like, it's not that well written. The kind of camp overlord director, I can't describe a single thing about him apart from the fact that he has purple lips. Like, she constantly references the fact that his purple lips saying this, and his purple lips like pursed in anger. It's just such a caricature, and it's really cheesy, and I just think like the way that he like flips and he's like constantly angry and he like hits somebody in front of a camera crew, and he's like abusive towards the members of the internment camp. And I think if that had been dealt with more subtly, if he had been really charming and suave and really put together in front of all of the people, and then as soon as the Red Cross were gone, as soon as the camera crew were gone, it was just absolute hellfire, that would have been more realistic, it would have been more emotional, and it would have been far more impactful. But the way that it is, it just kind of makes you cringe. And I hate saying that, because I really wanted to be championing this book, because like it's an own voices author writing about a subject which is horrendous, but it just doesn't feel authentic at all, and it just feels quite childish. And I think it's been dumbed down, which YA doesn't need to be dumbed down. YA can talk about controversial topics and hard topics. Like, just look at The Hate You Give. YA can talk about hard things without being dumbed down, and this feels like it's just so simplified. And that makes me angry. And so that's why I've just decided right here, right now, I'm dropping it down to a 2 stars, because it was a 2.5 and I'd rounded it up to 3 because it's not as bad as like other girls, but I can look at it by itself and it's a 2 star. It's a 2.5 star down to a 2. There we go. I said it on camera now. I'm going to have to go and edit my vlog. And then the last book, because I haven't ranted enough, the last book that we read from the TBR jar was The Million Pieces of Nina Gill by Emma Smith Barton. And this was a 5 star, which I'm really glad about, because like, as you can tell, like we had quite a few 5 stars during Believeth On, but the rest of the month was a bit of a washout. So The Million Pieces of Nina Gill is about a girl called Nina Gill whose brother has gone, and she is trying to come to terms with that. She has a bit of a mental breakdown, which is fair because her brother is gone, but she gets very paranoid. Like, she's taking some medication, but then she kind of thinks that the doctors are just making her take the medication for the sake of it. And like, her mum, like, there's a lot of kind of like discussions about like the way that Indian families, I believe it might be Pakistani, but don't quote me on it. The kind of expectations that they have on their children, the way that they want them to like succeed at everything, and the fact that like mental health is quite a hard thing to talk about. So her mum is quite derogatory about the fact that she's taking medication. Like, she wants her to take it, but she's kind of like, don't tell anyone about that, that's our little secret. So it makes Nina quite uncomfortable with how she is feeling, and that means that when she starts kind of spiraling rapidly out of control and her anxiety is getting worse and her depression is getting worse and she's beginning to get a bit paranoid and a little bit psychotic, she doesn't feel comfortable talking about it. She hides it. Like, she's sneaking out in the middle of the night and having like scenes with her boyfriend, but it's just like delusions. Like, she believes that she's gone to see him in the park, but actually he hasn't seen her because he's been studying. And because she's such an unreliable narrator, it makes it so interesting. Like, you can't tell what is really happening, and it's fascinating, and I think it's handled so gently. And you can tell that Emma Barton Smith? Oh god, am I saying it the wrong way around? Emma. You can tell that the author has some kind of personal experience with people who have had this kind of mental health issue, because it is handled so well. Like, she doesn't shy away from like the character going to counselling, she doesn't shy away from like having the medical interventions, and she shows that it's sometimes important to have a combination of the two. Talking therapy can help, medication can help. Often a combination of the two is the way that you really can recover from this kind of thing the best. And not many authors are comfortable enough with discussing all of the options. They'll kind of pick the one that they feel most comfortable with, and then they push that one. So the fact that she lays it out very non-judgmentally is very, very clever, and I could not rate this book enough. So the next book that I read was Follow Me Like Me by Charlotte Sager, and I'll be honest with you, I read this one 2 weeks ago, already forgotten pretty much everything about it. So there's a girl who is like stalking a gym guy on every kind of social media you can think of, and there is a girl, dual perspective, who is being stalked on social media, and they kind of like start ruining her life. Like, they pretend to be like her friend's boyfriend, and they get her friend to like send them nudes, and then they leak it from her account and stuff. And it's all about like the dangers of social media, and remembering that social media lasts your whole lifetime. You can't like escape from it. But I don't know, it's a bit preachy. Like, I think that the idea that Charlotte Sager had was really clever, but I think it's kind of say like it's fine for you to stalk people on social media as long as you're not actively messaging them and stuff, and like it's fine as long as you stalk them on social media and then something good kind of happens to come out of it. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but it's one of those books where I'm not quite sure what it was really saying. I can see what it was trying to say, but it didn't really say it well. I gave it 3 stars at the time. I'm now thinking that should probably drop down, but I'm going to stick with 3 stars because I'll have like a proper think about it later. But yeah, it was a bit disappointing. The next book that I read in May was Far From Perfect by Holly Smale, and thankfully this was another 5-star. So this is the second book in the Valentine's series, which follows 3 sisters and a brother who are like the kind of like the Kardashians, basically. They're family members. Their gran was like a Oscar winner, and she's really, really famous, so they're like the kind of like upper class. They've been born into this family, and they're expected to kind of lead by example and like follow in their grandmother's footsteps. So the first book follows the youngest sister. This book follows Faith, who is kind of the aspiring actress. She's the good girl. She's the one that's like never done anything wrong, and this follows her as she discovers that she is far from perfect. Loved it. First one, a lot of fun, very cute and quirky and sweet, and it was kind of so twee that it pissed me off for the first half of the book, but then it clicked and it was like amazing, and I loved it. And I was kind of expecting the same thing with this one, but the narrator of Faith is far more palatable. So she doesn't really like being famous. She doesn't really want it at all, but she feels like she has to do the right thing for her family. So she's kind of constantly got that like inner turmoil going on of like, oh great, I've got this really rich like musician boyfriend, and he's writing me like the most cliched song ever, and I should be really grateful, and this should be the most romantic thing that's ever happened, but I'm kind of like internally rolling my eyes. And it's just really relatable, and I love that, and it's so fun. But there's also like a lot of like darker aspects to it. Like, she kind of shaves her head and she goes a bit off the rails, and it's kind of like Britney's story, I guess. Like, she was the good girl and she did everything that she should do, and then she went off the rails and everybody kind of started looking at her in a completely different way. And I think the way that Holly Smale tackles it is very interesting. There's also kind of like a twist that implies where the next story is going to go, and it's made me even more interested because the next sister who will be focused upon is my favourite out of the three, has been from the beginning, and there's a lot more to her story than you would expect. The breadcrumbs have kind of been sprinkled through, and I'd been kind of picking up on things, wondering what was going on, and then when it got revealed I was very surprised, but in a really good way, because it made so much sense, and it makes you kind of look back at the first two books again and like in a completely different light. So I definitely think I'm going to want to reread these before the third one comes out, which should be hopefully next February or March time. I think that's when this one came out. But yeah, I haven't had a chance to read Geek Girl yet, but I'm going to need to, because if it's anything like these ones, Holly Smale is brilliant. The next book that I read was Blight by Alexandra Duncan. This is another one that I tried the first chapter, then thought I would kind of plough through the rest of the book. The first chapter didn't impress me that much, but I liked the fact that it didn't go where I expected it to. So this one, it's a dystopian. There's crops, they have a blight, there's like a corrupt government, there's one girl against the world, and you know, it's pretty predictable, but it's quite interesting. And then the ending doesn't pay off at all, and it kind of feels like there should be a sequel, but this came out in 2017 and there's no news of a sequel, so I'm guessing that it is a standalone that just is really unsatisfying. Which is a shame, because the character is interesting. Her name is Tempest. I'd forgotten. How could I forget a name like that? So Tempest almost kills this guy, who is like trying to break into their government facility. And then he ends up killing her squad. Well, his girlfriend kills her squad, so she kills his girlfriend, and then his like rebel team kidnap her, but then the Blight's released, so they have to work together, and it kind of ticks all of the cliche YA boxes for the first half, but then it gets much more interesting in the second half. I still didn't absolutely love it. I think I gave it 3 stars. I'm just going to check because I just can't apparently remember simple numbers at this point. 3 stars for Blight. But I think it's a case that if it was meant to have a sequel, it's probably not coming anymore, which is a shame. And I think if it had been advertised, like if it had been part of a series, it might have been better. But again, it was fun enough. I haven't read a dystopian in a while, and now I have, and I have scratched that itch. The next book I read was The Eid Gift by S.K. Alley. This is a short story set in the same universe as Love from A to Z. It follows the main characters who are Adam and Zainab. It sits between the main bulk of Love from A to Z and the epilogue. So it's like a little kind of short story that sits in between, which is really, really cute. I loved Adam and Zainab. The epilogue of the first book made me bawl my eyes out when I read it. So I knew I was going to love this one. Gave it 4 stars. It's very short, but it's very cute, and I'm glad that we kind of got to see a bit more of like a slice of life from these characters. Then I read What Stars Are Made Of by Sarah Allen. This one I gave 4 stars to. It follows a little girl who has Turner syndrome, and she wants to kind of make life more financially stable for her big sister, who has just found out she's pregnant. So she enters a competition to get a underrated woman in STEM put into an exhibit at the Smithsonian. So she picks Cecilia Payne, who actually discovered what stars were made of, had a male scientist tell her that she was talking bullshit, and then he stole her research and like used it for himself, so he got the credit. I'd never heard of her. I thought the story was fascinating. It was very, very short, and I think it would have had more of an impact if it had been longer. It is middle grade, but I think it's trying to do too much. It's trying to do too much in a very short page length. So you've got like her sister is pregnant, she has the Turner syndrome, like the project that she's running, and her also kind of making a friendship with this girl who's just moved to the school, and them kind of teaming up against the bullies and things. And I think if it had been a bit longer, it would have been a bit more fleshed out, and it might have been a bit more satisfying. As it was, I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I just think if it had been a bit longer, it could have easily been a 5-star. And then I finished the month by reading 2 non-fiction books. The first of those was What Have I Done by Laura Dockrill, which was a 5-star, absolutely amazing look at Laura Dockrill's experience with postpartum psychosis. It's hard to review non-fiction books, especially memoirs, because you're never going to have the exact same experience. But I related very deeply to kind of like the portrayal of motherhood and the way that, like, just after you've given birth, especially if you have like a traumatic birth. I wouldn't say my first birth was traumatic, but it was like not the greatest. So it does kind of make you feel a bit alienated from your baby and from your body, and it does make you feel a bit kind of cut off from the world because you don't really have many people to like talk to about it. And so I really appreciated that. Like, I read the first half of this book in one sitting, and I started reading it at like 11:45, so that was a big problem. I should have just waited and read it the next day. But then it becomes very difficult to get through because the emotion is just so raw, and even though Laura's got like a couple of years distance from when it happened to when she's writing this book, you can still tell how deeply it has impacted her. And I think particularly because Laura makes it quite apparent that she hasn't dealt with mental health struggles in her life at all, so to suddenly have what should be like the best day of your life become the start of like the worst period of your life is just horrendous, and I feel so deeply for her. But this is definitely a book that I think if you're a new mother and you're struggling, it's a very interesting read because it will give you somebody to relate to. If you've got previous experience with postpartum psychosis, or if you'd like to like educate yourself on it more, I'd highly recommend it. And the last book that I read in May, the end of this ridiculously long wrap up, was a teen writer's guide called Your Road Trip to Writing by Jennifer Jenkins. Kind of read more like an autobiography because like Jennifer Jenkins uses a lot of examples from her own life to like explain her writing style. And it's quite simplistic, so I only gave this one 3 stars in the end, but it was a fun read to kind of break up where we'd been having some quite dark reads towards the end of the month. And that's it. 32 books in 32 days, which is impressive. Thank you for staying with me for this long, because I've just spoken about more books in a very short period of time than I ever have before. If you like this video, like it. If you've read any of these books, leave your thoughts down below. As I said before, I've linked some reviews for Believeth On and for the TBR Jar books down in the comments. Not the comments, the description. So if you're interested in those, check those out. It gives some more like detailed, coherent thoughts, because I always just babble like an idiot in front of the camera. Hashtag struggles. Yeah, so I'll see you soon. Bye.